You lost boy? Since when do we let a black man sit in my diner, breathing my air, like he owns the place?
Deputy Roy Hutchins sneered, leaning his heavy posture forward with a sudden burst of motion, deliberately flicking his fingers to send a wave of scalding black coffee splashing straight into the quiet man's lap. The entire diner went dead silent as Hutchins let out a harsh, mocking laugh, eyes fixed on the historic brass watch resting on the table.
Where'd a fella like you steal a nice watch like that? People like you don't keep time in my town. You wait until you're spoken to.
Before the man could even fold his napkin, Hutchins swept his hand downward in one fast, violent motion, sending the precious family heirloom flying straight onto the cold linoleum, cracking its glass face with a sharp, echoing snap.
Now get on your feet before I put you where you belong!
Hutchins barked, completely blind to the red eye of a phone, recording his every move. He thought he was just humiliating another helpless outsider. He had absolutely no idea that this quiet man was Nathaniel Calloway, the newly confirmed United States Attorney, the chief federal prosecutor who literally owned the legal ground beneath the deputy's boots. And at that exact moment, 6 black federal SUVs filled with heavily armed U.S. Marshals were rolling up the highway, just 9 minutes away from setting this deputy's entire world on fire. Welcome back to Black Stories, where the arrogant always learn the hard way. If you're ready to see absolute dignity restored and federal justice served in real time, smash that like button and subscribe right now. Let's take you back to the very beginning to see exactly how this unforgettable story played out. Tuesday morning, early October, the kind of thin, silver dawn that lays itself flat over the cotton fields of the rural South and makes even the rusted-out water towers look like something worth painting. Macon Ridge, population 4,000, and falling, one blinking traffic light, one shuttered textile mill, one county jail, and a sheriff's department that had run the place like a private kingdom since before most of the residents were born. The kind of town you drive through on the way to somewhere else and never think about again, unless you grew up there. And Nathaniel Calloway grew up there. He came back maybe twice a year now. And every time the drive-in did the same thing to his chest. Tightened it. The way a hand tightens around a railing. There was the church his daddy helped rebuild after it burned in 1971. There was the field his grandmother picked until her fingers bled. There was the stretch of 2-lane where, when Nathaniel was 16, a deputy had made him lie face down in the road for 20 minutes over a busted taillight, while cars slowed down to look. The town hadn't changed. The town never changed. That was almost the point of it. But Nathaniel he pulled the rental. A plain gray sedan. Nothing special. He'd waved off the government car into the gravel lot of the Macon Ridge Hospice at 6 to 10 in the morning. And his brother Andre was already there, leaning against his truck with 2 gas station coffees going cold in his hands. The brothers didn't say much. They didn't have to. They walked in together, signed the visitor log together, and stood on either side of a narrow bed where their mother, Miss Ada Calloway, 81 years old, 94 pounds, slept with her, mouth slightly open and an oxygen line resting under her nose. She'd raised them in a 2-room house with a tin roof that sang when it rained. She'd worked as a maid in houses she was not allowed to enter through the front door. She'd ironed white men's shirts and folded white women's sheets and come home and read to her boys by a kerosene lamp because the power got cut more months than it didn't. And she had told them every single night, every single one, "You are not what they say you are." She said it so many times it stopped being a sentence and became a kind of spine, something they stood up straight on. Nathaniel took her hand. It was light as paper. "Hey, Mama, it's Nathaniel. I'm here." Her eyes didn't open, but her fingers moved, just barely. A flutter against his palm. The hospice nurse, a soft-spoken black woman named Dorothy, who'd been on the night shift, touched Nathaniel's shoulder on her way out. She had a good night. Dorothy said, "She knows you boys come. She always settles when you come." Then she paused at the door, and her eyes went a little wide, and she lowered her voice. Mr. Calloway, I saw on the news about the confirmation, about what you—" She pressed her lips together and shook her head, and there were tears standing in her eyes that had nothing to do with sadness. "Your mama, Lord, if she could open her eyes and see what her boy did," because that was the thing nobody in Macon Ridge knew yet. 11 days ago, in a marble hearing room 900 miles north, the United States Senate had voted unanimously, both parties, not a single nay, to confirm Nathaniel Calloway as the United States Attorney for the Middle District, the first black man ever to hold the office, the chief federal law enforcement officer for a region that included the county he was born in, the county that had once made him lie face down in a road. He hadn't done it loud. That wasn't him. He'd spent 30 years being underestimated, and he had learned somewhere along the way. That being underestimated was a kind of armor if you knew how to wear it. He'd put himself through state college on a janitor's wages. He'd gone to a law school that had never admitted a man like him and graduated second in his class. He'd spent 2 decades as a federal prosecutor. Quiet, surgical, relentless, putting away the kind of corruption and violence that other men were too connected or too comfortable to touch. And in 11 hours, he was scheduled to be sworn in, a formal investiture at the federal courthouse 2 hours north. Judges, cameras, his name in the record forever. A protective detail of U.S. Marshals had been assigned to him the day of his confirmation. The way they always are. He'd politely told them he was driving down to see his mother first, alone, with his brother. And he'd see the detail at the staging point that morning. He'd left his phone in the car. That was the only mistake he made all day. He left his phone in the car so he could be a son in that room, and not the United States Attorney. Just for an hour. He wanted 1 hour, where he was only Ada Calloway's boy, when he and Andre walked back out into the gravel lot at 6:45. The sun was up, and the air smelled like wood smoke, and the morning was... For 1 more minute. "Gentle, you eat?" Andre asked. "On a plane yesterday. Don't count plane food." Andre almost smiled. Andre was the younger brother by 4 years. A high school history teacher. Broad-shouldered, hot under the collar, in all the ways Nathaniel had trained himself not to be. He taught American history to 140 kids a year in a building that was falling apart. And he told them the truth about it, which made certain people in Macon Ridge dislike him very much. "Pier lines still open," he said. "Best biscuits in 3 counties. You remember pier lines." Nathaniel remembered pier lines The whole town remembered Pierline's vinyl booths the color of a robin's egg, a pie case that spun, a coffee pot that never stopped. When they were boys, their mother used to take them there on the rare flush Sunday and split one plate of biscuits and gravy 3 ways and make it feel like a feast. Yeah, Nathaniel said, let's get biscuits. And that, right there, was the decision that put 2 grown men in the back of a story about the last morning Deputy Roy Hutchins ever wore a badge. 2 brothers, 1 dying mother, a plate of biscuits, and a cracked brass watch. Remember the watch. It's going to matter. Let me tell you about the watch. Because you can't understand what got cracked on that diner floor unless you understand what it was. It belonged to Elijah Calloway, Nathaniel and Andre's father, a sharecropper's son who became a mechanic. The best in 3 counties. A man who could lay his hand on an engine and hear what was wrong with it, the way a doctor hears a heart. White men brought him their cars and called him by his first name when they wanted the work done fast, and by no name at all when they paid him. He kept a brass railroad watch in the bib of his overalls, his whole working life. A cheap watch. Nothing. Watch. The kind you could buy from a catalog. And he wound it every morning at the kitchen table before his shift. And he taught both his boys to do the same. A man keeps his own time. He'd say, don't matter what they make you wait for. You keep your own. In the spring of 1962, Elijah Calloway and 4 other men sat down at a lunch counter 40 miles from Macon Ridge and asked to be served a cup of coffee. They were not served. They were dragged off the stools by the collar. Same grip. The exact same grip a deputy would use on his son 60 years later. Some cruelties get passed down like heirlooms. And they were beaten on the sidewalk, while a deputy stood by and watched, and the deputy said, putting his boot on Elijah's neck, while the man's watch ticked in his torn overalls, we know how to handle your kind around here. They broke 2 of Elijah's ribs and 3 of his fingers, the fingers he made his living with, and he never got the full use of them back. And for the rest of his life, there were certain engines he couldn't fix anymore, but he kept the watch. He picked it up off that sidewalk with his good hand, and it was still ticking. And he carried it for another 40 years. He used to take it out at the dinner table when his sons were small and set it face up next to his plate. And he would tell them the story. Not to frighten them, but to arm them. They put me on the ground. He'd say, and the watch kept going. They can put you on the ground too. They've been doing it a long time, and they're not done. But you keep your own time. You hear me. Nobody gets to tell you what hour it is in your own chest. And their mother, Ada, ironing in the corner, would add her line. The one that became their spine. You are not what they say you are. Elijah Calloway died when Nathaniel was in his 2nd year of law school. At the funeral, Ada took the brass watch out of her husband's coat and pressed it into her oldest son's hand and folded his fingers over it and said, he'd want you to have his time. Nathaniel wound it that night, and it kept perfect time. 60 years old, and never once losing a minute. And he had carried it ever since. To his graduation, into every closing argument, into the hearing room where the Senate confirmed him. It rode in the breast pocket of his coat over his heart. And every morning, at a kitchen table of his own now, in a house his father could never have walked into through the front door, he wound it. A man keeps his own time. So when Roy Hutchins slapped that watch out of Nathaniel's hand and onto the linoleum of Caroline's kitchen, and the glass cracked, he didn't know it. He never could have known it. But he was finishing a sentence that another deputy had started on a sidewalk in 1962. The same family, the same watch, the same 4 words, 60 years apart, and not one thing learned in between. Except this time, the watch had a witness, and this time, the man it belonged to had spent 30 years learning the exact machinery that was about to come down on the head of the man who'd cracked it. History doesn't repeat, but sometimes it rhymes so hard, your teeth hurt. Remember the watch. Pierline's kitchen sat at the bend where Route 9 met the old county road. A low brick building with a hand-painted sign and a parking lot of crushed shells. Inside, it smelled exactly like 1985. Bacon grease, percolated coffee, and cinnamon off the morning rolls. A handful of regulars hunched over the counter. An old farmer in a feed cap. 2 pipeline workers in reflective vests. A young mother bouncing a baby on her knee. A waitress named Casey, maybe 19. Refilled cups with a pot in each hand. Behind the line, the cook, a heavy-set white woman in her 60s named Glenda, who'd worked that griddle for 30 years. Scraped and flipped without looking up. Andre led them to a booth by the window. Nathaniel slid in, facing the door, the way he always sat. An old prosecutor's habit. Casey came over with the coffee pot and 2 laminated menus and a real smile. The kind small-town girls still have before life sands it off them. Mornin'. Y'all want coffee to start, please? Nathaniel said. Black. Sama? Said Andre. And whatever's got Caroline's name on it, he hasn't had a decent biscuit in 20 years. Casey laughed and poured. For about 4 minutes, and it really was only 4 minutes. It was the best morning Nathaniel had had in a long time. He wrapped both hands around the warm cup. He took his father's watch out of his pocket, out of habit, and set it on the table. Face up, the way Daddy used to set it on the dinner table so he wouldn't be late for his second shift. The brass was worn smooth at the edges, from 60 years of a man's thumb. It still kept perfect time. Nathaniel had carried it to law school graduation. He'd carried it into every closing argument of his career. He carried it now. Andre watched him touch it and said, quietly, he'd be losing his mind right now. You know that his boy, U.S. attorney. Andre shook his head, and his voice cracked just a hair. Mama, too. If she could. I know. Nathaniel said, I know. Man? And then the bell over the door jangled, and 2 sheriff's deputies walked in. And the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. You could feel it before you understood it. The way the regulars suddenly got very interested in their plates. The way Casey's shoulders climbed toward her ears. The way Glenda, at the griddle, went still for half a second before she started scraping again. Harder. The first deputy was big and gone soft in the middle. 50-some. A gray mustache and a sunburned neck and a way of walking like the floor owed him rent. That was Roy Hutchins. 26 years on the Macon Ridge Force. The second was young. 26. 27. A high and tight haircut and the eager, unfinished face of a man still learning to be cruel from the man in front of him. That was Tyler Boone. 8 months on the job. They didn't sit. They stood just inside the door and let their eyes do a slow lap of the room. and Roy Hutchins's eyes stopped on the booth by the window. On the two black men. On the dented brass watch, sitting on the table catching the light. He nudged Boone with an elbow and said something low. And Boone snorted. Now here's a detail I want you to hold on to, because it's going to matter at the end. 40 seconds before Hutchins walked over to Nathaniel, a white man in a leather jacket walked into Pearline's, set a duffel bag down in the corner booth, ordered a coffee, and pulled out a laptop. Hutchins didn't look at him twice, didn't ask his name, didn't ask what he was doing in town or what was in the bag. A stranger. An actual stranger. Nobody in that diner had ever seen. With an unmarked bag, and Roy Hutchins's eyes slid right over him, like he was furniture. But the two black men in a booth, one of them, a man who'd been born 4 miles from where they sat. Those two, Hutchins crossed the whole room for. He came up to the booth and put both hands flat on the table, leaned his weight on them. So his shadow fell across Nathaniel's plate. "Don't believe I know you two," Hutchins said. "No, sir," Nathaniel said evenly. "I grew up here. Been gone a while. Grew up here." Hutchins repeated it like it was the punchline to a joke he was still building. He looked at Andre. "You two together. He's my brother," Andre said, and there was already a wire of tension in his voice. Hutchins ignored him and kept his eyes on Nathaniel. On the watch. "That's a nice watch." He let the words go slow and ugly in his mouth. "Where'd a fella like you steal a nice watch like that?" Let that question sit there for a second. Not where'd you get it. Where'd you steal it? The whole worldview of Roy Hutchins lived inside that one word. A man who looked like Nathaniel could not, in Hutchins's accounting of the universe, simply own a thing. He had to have come by it some other way. Stolen it. Found it. Taken it off somebody. "It was my father's," Nathaniel said. Calm. Always calm. And that calm was the thing Roy Hutchins could not stand. Anger. He knew what to do with. Calm was a closed door. So he did the thing that told everybody in that diner exactly who he was. He reached down with 2 fingers and flicked Nathaniel's coffee cup. It tipped, and a wave of scalding black coffee ran across the table and straight into Nathaniel's lap. A strangled little laugh came out of young Boone over by the door. Somewhere across the room, a fork stopped scraping against a plate, and the whole diner went dead silent. Nathaniel did not move. He did not jump up, did not curse, did not give Hutchins the flinch the man had crossed the room to collect. He reached for a napkin, slow, and laid it across his lap like he was sitting down to Sunday dinner. Andre started to come up out of the booth, and Nathaniel lifted 1 finger off the table, just one, and his little brother sat back down, jaw locked, and slid his hand into his jacket pocket, where his phone was already running. That small red eye already open. "People like you don't keep time in my town," Hutchins said, his eyes sliding back to the brass watch on the table. "You wait until you're spoken to. And then," before Nathaniel could so much as fold that napkin, Hutchins swept his hand down across the table and sent the watch flying. Elijah Calloway's watch. 60 years old. The watch that had already survived 1 diner, 1 beating, and the worst men of another century. It hit the cold linoleum face down with a sharp, echoing snap of cracking glass. That was the moment. Right there. Not the coffee. Not the slur. The watch on the floor, with its cracked face still ticking. Nathaniel's eyes went down to it. And for 1 second, one single second in this entire story, something moved behind those eyes that was older and deeper and far more dangerous than calm. Then he put it away. He put it back in the same box he had been putting it in his whole life. Now, get on your feet. Hutchins barked. Before I put you where you belong. And here is where Roy Hutchins made his real mistake. Though it would take him another 9 minutes to understand it. Because Nathaniel did something nobody in that diner expected. He did not argue. And he did not get up. He went still. Completely still. Both hands flat on the table in plain sight. Palms down. The most non-threatening posture a human body can make. And he began to speak. Quiet. Level. Like a man reading off the morning weather. Officer, I want to be very clear and very respectful with you. Because I do not want any misunderstanding. You have not told me that I am being detained. And you have not told me that I am free to go. So, I am going to ask you directly. Am I being detained? And if I am, what is the reasonable suspicion of a crime? The diner went quieter still. If that was even possible. The old farmer at the counter turned halfway around on his stool, because here is what Roy Hutchins did not know. He thought he was leaning over a scared black man in a booth. He was actually leaning over a man who had spent 30 years inside the machinery of American law, a man who knew the Fourth Amendment, the way a carpenter knows the grain of wood. Nathaniel had not raised his voice. He had not called Hutchins a racist. He had simply, very gently, asked the one question that turns a casual abuse of power into a documented, prosecutable federal event. And Andre's phone, propped against the napkin holder, had been recording every second of it from the moment that coffee cup tipped. Young Casey chose that exact moment to come toward the booth with a fistful of napkins, just trying to help. And Hutchins turned on her so fast that she froze where she stood. Leave it, he snapped. They're not staying. And Casey, 19 years old, with a deputy's whole department standing between her and her next paycheck, looked at Nathaniel and looked at Hutchins. And you could watch the war happen on her face in real time. She backed away with her hands a little raised, like she was the one in trouble. And she whispered, I'm sorry. And Nathaniel gave her the smallest nod. Like it's all right? It's not your fault. And that small mercy, in the middle of all of it, was almost the worst part. Hold on. So, a deputy throws scalding coffee into a man's lap, cracks his dead father's watch on the floor, and won't even let a waitress hand the man a napkin. For drinking coffee in a public diner? Nah, that is the part that gets me. They had not done one single thing. Yeah, keep watching. It gets worse before it gets right. Boone had drifted around to the far side of the booth now, boxing them in. One deputy at each end. Standard intimidation. Geometry. Hutchins leaned back down. Close. His coffee and cigarette breath filling the space between them. His face had gone a shade darker, because he had no answer to the question Nathaniel had asked. There was no answer. There was no crime. There was no suspicion. There was a black man with a nice watch. And so Hutchins did what cornered bullies always do. He skipped the law and went straight to force. You want to be a lawyer, he said. And he reached down and grabbed a fistful of Nathaniel's collar. Get up. Now. He hauled. And Nathaniel came up out of the booth, He did not resist. You cannot resist. Resisting is how men like Nathaniel end up dead in this country. And as he came up, Hutchins shoved him back against the cold glass of the window, hard, and held him there. Search him, Hutchins told Boone, on what Andre was up now. Both hands out. On what grounds he didn't do anything. You can't just... Boone put a hand on his weapon. Just put his hand on it. Didn't draw. But the message landed in the room, like a dropped plate. The young mother grabbed her baby up off her knee. One of the pipeline workers said, "Soft. Hey. Now. Hey." And then thought better of it and looked at his eggs. "Sit down." Boone told Andre. His voice shook a little. He was scared too. You could hear it. Scared of the thing he was being pulled into. Sit. Sit down. Andre? Nathaniel's voice cut across all of it. Not loud, but with a weight that made even Hutchins pause. He looked his little brother dead in the eye. Sit down. Keep your hands open. Don't give him anything. And then, lower. Just for Andre. 3 words that carried 30 years in them. Let it record. Andre said. His hands were shaking. He kept them flat on the table, where they could be seen. And the phone in his pocket kept its red eye open. Boone patted Nathaniel down against the window. Rough. His hands jerky and unpracticed. Going through the pockets of a sport coat that probably cost more than the deputy made in 2 weeks. He pulled out a wallet. Hotel key card. A folded sheet of paper. No weapon. No drugs. No contraband. A wallet. A key. And a piece of paper. Hutchins took the wallet and flipped it open and pulled out the driver's license and held it up next to Nathaniel's face, the way they do. Looking back and forth, and the name on the license said, Nathaniel R. Calloway, and the address was a city 2 hours north. A good address. And Hutchins's lip curled. This, your current address. Yes. Officer. Long way from home. He flicked the license back at Nathaniel's chest. It bounced off, and Nathaniel caught it against his stomach. What are you doing back in Macon Ridge? My mother is dying. Nathaniel said. The 4 flattest. Truest words in the whole diner. She's at the hospice up the road. We came from there this morning. We stopped for breakfast. And it didn't land. That's the thing about a man like Hutchins. My mother is dying didn't move him an inch. Because he had already decided, before he crossed the room, that whatever came out of this man's mouth was a lie. He'd decided it, the way men like him have always decided things in this country. Skin first. Story never. Yeah. Well, Hutchins said, tell it walking. You boys aren't welcome here. Get in your vehicle and get out of my county, and don't let me see you again. He paused, and then he reached for the thing that men like him always reach for when their power feels even slightly questioned. The words that have echoed through every diner and every back road and every traffic stop in this country for 100 years. We know how to handle your kind around here. Your kind. The words sat in the greasy air of Perline's kitchen like a struck match. Andre's knuckles went white on the table edge. The old farmer at the counter looked down at his coffee like he was ashamed of it. And Nathaniel Calloway, collar yanked, coffee drying cold and brown on his slacks. His father's watch cracked on the floor between 2 sets of deputy boots. Looked at Roy Hutchins, and did not give him one single thing He bent down, slowly, hands visible the whole way, and picked up the watch off the linoleum. He turned it over in his fingers. The crystal was cracked clean across the face. Behind the crack, the little second hand was still going. Dick, Dick, Dick. The way it had gone through marches and mills and funerals. And Nathaniel closed his fist around it gently and stood back up. Officer Hutchins, he said. And Hutchins blinked. Because he hadn't given his name, the man had read it off his nameplate without seeming to. The way you'd file away a license plate? I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. Because the next few minutes are going to matter more to you than to me. Hutchins laughed. A short, ugly bark. That a threat? No. Sir, it's a courtesy. Nathaniel's voice never moved off that low. Level register. You've detained 2 men without reasonable suspicion. You've used force on a compliant person. You've conducted a search with no probable cause and no consent. Your partner has put his hand on his weapon in front of a room full of witnesses, including a mother holding an infant. And you've done all of it on camera. He didn't look at Andre's pocket. He didn't have to. I'm telling you this so that when you decide what you do in the next 5 minutes, you decide it with all the facts. Most people don't get that chance. I'm giving it to you. You have to understand what that is. That's a man whose father's watch is cracked in his fist, whose mother is dying up the road, who has just been shoved against a window and called your kind in front of his hometown. And instead of rage, instead of pleading, he's offering the man who did it a way out. He's reading him his options like a defense attorney who already knows the verdict. That's not weakness. People mistake that for weakness. That is the most dangerous kind of strength there is. Because it cannot be provoked, and it cannot be rushed, and it does not need you to lose your temper to win. It scared Boone. You could see it scare Boone. The young deputy's eyes kept ticking to the phones. Because by now, 3 of them were up. The pipeline worker had his phone out under the lip of the counter. And so did the young mother, recording with one thumb while she held her baby with the other arm. But it didn't scare Hutchins. It enraged him. Because the one thing a man like Roy Hutchins cannot stand is to feel small in his own kingdom. And this calm black man was somehow, without raising his voice, making him feel exactly that. So, Hutchins reached for the radio on his shoulder. Dispatch. This is Hutchins, out at pier lines on Route 9. I got 2 males. Refusing lawful orders. One of 'em real mouthy. Possible. He looked at Nathaniel, and his lip curled. Possible 1031 in progress. Gonna need a second unit. And run me a name. Calloway. Nathaniel. Out of county license. A 1031. Crime in progress. He said it, knowing it was a lie. The way these men always reach past the truth, for the one word that turns their own fear into a warrant? Aggressive. Threatening. Dangerous. There was no crime in progress. There was a cold plate of biscuits. Nobody had touched. The radio crackled. Sope. Hutchins. Second unit en route. Stand by on that name. And here is where the clock I told you about starts to tick out loud. Because 2 things were now moving toward Pierline's kitchen at the same time. And only one set of people in that diner knew about both of them. The first thing was a 2nd sheriff's unit. 4 minutes out. Another deputy, coming to back up Hutchins's lie. The second thing was a convoy of 6 black Chevy Suburbans. Government plates, carrying a protective detail of United States Marshals and the special agent in charge of the regional FBI field office that had been quietly trying to locate the new United States attorney for 40 minutes. Because he'd gone off-grid. Because he'd left his phone in a rental car to hold his dying mother's hand. And the detail had finally pinged his location to a diner at the bend of Route 9. They were now 7 minutes out. 6 minutes. Roy Hutchins had no idea. He thought the only thing coming up that road was more men like him. He folded his arms and planted his boots and got ready to enjoy the wait. Sit, he told Nathaniel and Andre, gesturing at the booth like he was doing them a kindness. We're going to let dispatch sort you out. And, son, this to Andre, who was vibrating with a fury he was barely holding. You put your hands flat on that table, and you keep 'em there, or my partner's going to get nervous. You understand me. I understand you fine, Andre said through his teeth. Andre. Nathaniel. Again. Just the name. And Andre breathed out through his nose and laid his hands flat, and Nathaniel slid back into the booth across from him, calm as Sunday, and set the broken watch on the table between them and put his hand over it. The seconds crawled. The whole diner held its breath. Glenda at the griddle had stopped cooking entirely. She stood with a spatula in her hand and tears in her eyes, and she did not say one word. And that silence, the silence of every decent person in that room who was too afraid to speak, that silence has its own weight in this story. It always does. The cruelty of 2 men is loud, but the cruelty only works because of the quiet of 20. Nathaniel looked around the room while they waited, slow and unhurried, and he saw it all. He saw the farmer who wouldn't look up. He saw Casey crying by the pie case. He saw the young mother filming with shaking hands, and he saw, in the corner booth, the white stranger in the leather jacket, the one with the unmarked duffel bag, the one Hutchins never questioned, calmly close his laptop, lift his coffee, and watch the whole thing with the flat professional interest of a man who has seen a great deal. Nathaniel's eyes paused on him for half a second longer than the rest, then moved on. You always, this quiet Hutchins said, just to needle him. Cat got your tongue. Now that you don't got your little lawyer speech, I said what I needed to say. Officer. That right? Hutchins crouched down, so his face was level with Nathaniel's across the table. Close. His coffee and cigarette breath in the space between them. And he dropped his voice to something almost intimate, the way bullies do when they want to share the truth. They keep behind the badge. Let me tell you how it works out here. Mr. Calloway, since you've been gone so long, you forgot. Out here, I am the law, not the county seat, not the state, not whatever city you crawled off to. Me. You understand I decide who's a problem and who isn't. I decide who stays and who goes. And I decided about you. The second you walked in my diner with that watch, you can't tell me how you got. He smiled. Some things don't change. No matter how nice the coat you put on. Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment, and then he said, quietly, almost kindly, almost sad, you're right. Some things don't change. He turned the cracked watch a half-inch under his palm. My father carried this watch when men exactly like you ran him off a lunch counter 40 miles from here in 1962. Same words. We know how to handle your kind. He kept the watch. The men who said it. A pause. Nobody remembers their names. Hutchins's smile flickered. You think you're the law in this county? Nathaniel went on. Softer still. I want you to remember that you said that out loud. In front of all these people. I want you to remember every word. Officer Hutchins. Because you are going to be asked about it. Under oath. Una ua. Hutchins started to laugh again. And that's when his radio crackled back to life. Hutchins. Dispatch. That name you ran? Calloway. Nathaniel R. A pause on the line. A long one. Too long. Roy. You need to. Hang on. Stand by. Let me get the sheriff. Something in the dispatcher's voice. A new thing. A worried thing. Hutchins frowned and keyed the mic. Say again. It's a name. Just give me the He got warrants or not. Negative on warrants. Roy. Get the sheriff on the line. Now. Do not. Static. Do not do anything else till you talk to Sheriff Lanier. For the first time, a hairline crack appeared in Roy Hutchins's face, same as it appears in all their faces. Right at the end, the first cold draft of what did I just do? He keyed the mic again. Dispatch. What is going on? Why are you telling me to get the sheriff? And outside, faint at first and then not faint at all, came the sound of tires on crushed shell. A lot of tires. Heavy vehicles. More than one. More than two. Pulling fast off Route 9 into the lot of Pearline's kitchen and braking hard, Andre looked at his brother across the table. Nathaniel hadn't moved. His hand was still resting over his father's broken watch. But he closed his eyes, just for a second, and let out a long, slow breath. And when he opened them again, he looked very, very tired. Not afraid. Not triumphant. Just tired. In the way a man gets tired, carrying something heavy for 30 years, and finally getting to set it down. That'll be for me, he said. The bell over the door didn't jangle so much as get knocked aside. 6 black Suburbans had fanned across the shell lot of Pearline's kitchen in a formation that nobody in Macon Ridge had ever seen outside of a movie. Doors already swinging open. And the first people through the diner door were 2 Deputy U.S. Marshals in tactical vests with U.S. Marshals stitched in gold across the chest, moving fast and low and scanning the room the way professionals scan a room. And behind them came 4 more. And behind them came a tall black woman in a charcoal suit with a federal credential already up in her hand and a star on her belt. Renata Vega, Deputy United States Marshal, head of the protective detail, and her eyes swept the diner once and locked onto the booth by the window and onto Nathaniel Calloway with the coffee stain on his slacks and the cracked watch under his hand. And her whole body changed. There he is, she said. Sir. Mr. Calloway. Are you all right? Are you injured? The diner had gone so silent, you could hear the griddle ticking as it cooled. Roy Hutchins had stood up out of his crouch and taken 2 steps back, one hand drifting toward his belt out of pure animal reflex. And one of the marshals said, very flatly, Deputy, hand away from your weapon. Right now. And Hutchins's hand came away from his belt, like the belt had gone hot. Renata Vega crossed the diner to the booth. She did not look at the two county deputies. She looked at the man in the booth, and her voice, when she spoke to him, carried a careful, formal respect that made the whole room understand, before a single title had been said, that they had all just walked into the wrong story. Sir, we lost your location for 40 minutes. The agent in charge is 2 minutes out. The detail's been worried sick. Her eyes dropped to his slacks, to the dried coffee, to the broken watch in his fist, and then lifted, slowly, to the two county deputies standing frozen by the counter, and her expression went to something cold and bright and very, very controlled. Sir, what happened here? And this is the moment the whole story has been walking toward. Not the badges hitting the counter. That's coming. But this, right here, is the pivot. Because Nathaniel Calloway could have stood up in that instant and become the United States Attorney. He could have unloaded 30 years and one cracked watch on Roy Hutchins and watched the man come apart. Nobody on earth would have blamed him. He didn't. He slid out of the booth, slowly, and he stood up to his full height. And he put his father's broken watch carefully into the breast pocket of his coat, over his heart. And the first thing he said, the very first thing, before a word about himself, was to the deputy, Marshal Vega. He said, not taking his eyes off Hutchins. Before anything else, there's a young woman over there named Casey, and a cook named Glenda, and a young mother with a baby, and a few other folks, and none of them did anything but get caught in the middle of this. I'd like them taken care of and not kept here any longer than they need to be. They've had a hard enough morning. Vega blinked, then nodded once. Yes, Sir. Only then did Nathaniel turn the full weight of himself onto Roy Hutchins. You asked me where a fella like me got a watch like that? He said, quiet, the whole room leaning in to hear it. And you asked me what I was doing back in Macon Ridge. I told you the truth twice. And both times you decided I was lying, because of the only thing about me you ever bothered to look at. So let me answer your other question. The one you've been asking me since I walked in, the one underneath all the others. A Pause. Who do you think you are? He reached into his coat. Slowly, hands visible. The way he'd kept them visible the entire time. Even now, even here. Because that habit was carved into him too deep to ever fully put down. And he drew out a slim leather credential case and let it fall open. My name is Nathaniel Calloway. 11 days ago, the United States Senate confirmed me, unanimously, as the United States Attorney for this district. He let it sit. That means I am the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for 11 counties. Officer Hutchins, including this one, including Macon Ridge, including the floor you are standing on. In about 11 hours, I'm scheduled to be sworn in at the federal courthouse. These men and women came to escort me there. He closed the case. You said you were the law in this county. You're not. You never were. You were a man with a badge and a grudge. And as of this morning, you work. Indirectly. But absolutely. For me, you could have heard a napkin drop. Roy Hutchins's face did something I don't have a good word for. The blood went out of it. In stages, top to bottom. Like water draining out of a cracked glass. His mouth opened. closed, opened. The contempt that had been carved into his features for 26 years just fell off. And what was underneath it was a frightened old man who had finally, after a whole career of getting away with it, picked the wrong booth. Sir, I didn't. There must be. He couldn't find the end of a single sentence. I was just doing my... We got a call. We. You didn't get a call, Nathaniel said. You walked across the room. I watched you do it. Young Tyler Boone had gone the color of paper. His hand was nowhere near his weapon now. Both his hands hung empty and useless at his sides. And his eyes were wet and wide. And he looked from Hutchins to Nathaniel to the 6 federal marshals filling the diner. And you could see the exact moment the 8-month deputy understood that he had let an old man teach him how to throw his whole life away in under 10 minutes. Sir, Boone whispered. Sir, I'm so. I'd stop talking. Son, Vega told him. Not unkindly. Both of you. Anything you say right now, you're saying to a room full of federal witnesses and 4 phones. She turned. Speaking of which, because the door had opened one more time, and a man in his 50s with close-cropped gray hair and a federal windbreaker had come in, and Nathaniel almost smiled, because it was the stranger from the corner booth, the white man in the leather jacket with the unmarked duffel bag. Except the leather jacket was gone now, and the windbreaker said FBI across the back in yellow, and the duffel had a credential clipped to it. He'd been sitting in that diner the whole time. He was the advance man for the special agent in charge, sent ahead to confirm the location was secure before the principal arrived. He'd watched the entire thing unfold from 12 feet away. I got all of it, the agent said quietly, lifting a small recorder. From you lost. Boy, every word. Roy Hutchins made a sound, like the air going out of something. Sheriff Buck Lanier arrived 4 minutes later, and he arrived running. He came through the door of Pierline's red-faced and out-of-breath, hat in his hand. Having heard from his dispatcher exactly whose name his deputy had just run, and he took one look at the 6 federal vehicles in his lot and the U.S. marshals filling the diner and the United States attorney standing in the middle of it with a coffee stain on his slacks. And Sheriff Lanier did the math of his entire political career in about a second and a half. Mr. Calloway. Sir. He was nearly tripping over the words, Sheriff Buck Lanier. Sir. On behalf of this entire department, I am so deeply sorry. I had knew. This is not... We do not condone. Sheriff. Nathaniel's voice cut him off. Level as ever. You're about to tell me this isn't who your department is. I'd think very carefully before you say that, because I'm going to find out whether it's true, and I'd hate for the first thing you ever said to me to be a lie. He let that land. Right now, I'm not interested in your apology. I'm interested in 2 things. First, these 2 officers are going to surrender their weapons and their badges, and they are going to do it on that counter, in front of these witnesses, before they leave this building. Second, you and I are going to have a longer conversation, very soon, about how many other people in this county got this exact morning and didn't have 6 federal vehicles coming to find them. Lanier swallowed. He turned to his deputies. Roy. Tyler. His voice broke a little on the names. These were his men. Belts and badges. On the counter. Buck. Hutchins started. Desperate. Buck. Come on. This is. You know me. 26 years. You can't just. On the counter. Roy. Lanier wouldn't look at him. Now. And that was the sound. The one this whole story was named for. 2 duty belts unbuckling. 2 service weapons coming off. 2 sheriff's stars. One shined smooth by 26 years of a thumb. One, barely 8 months old. Set down on the worn Formica counter of Pearline's kitchen. Side by side. Next to the cold coffee pot. Hutchins' hands were shaking when he set his down. He looked at it lying there, and something in his face caved in completely. And he did not pick it back up. And he would never pick it back up again. 9 minutes. From you lost boy to 2 badges on a diner counter. Just like he was told. The marshals walked the brothers out to the convoy. As they reached the door, Nathaniel stopped, and he turned back, and he found Casey, 19 years old, still crying by the pie case, and Glenda the cook, standing white-faced behind her cooling griddle. He looked at them for a moment. You were scared, he said gently, to both of them, to the whole room of people who'd looked at their plates. I know you were. I'm not going to stand here and pretend that fear isn't real. Because, in this town, for some folks, it's been real for a long time. He nodded toward the 2 badges on the counter. But it's a little less real this morning than it was an hour ago. Try to remember that next time. That's all any of us can do. Be a little braver than we were the day before. And then he walked out into the morning sun with his brother and his father's broken watch over his heart. And got into a black Suburban. And was gone. Now, here's where it would be easy to tell you the simple version. That the new U.S. attorney came down like the hand of God and crushed the 2 men who'd humiliated him. But that's not what happened. And the reason it didn't is the most important thing in this whole story, because the first thing Nathaniel Calloway did, before he did anything else, was recuse himself. He could not be the prosecutor. He was the victim, a man of the law to his marrow. He understood that better than anyone alive. That justice that looks like personal revenge isn't justice at all. It's just power wearing a nicer suit. So he picked up the phone that night, after his investiture, and he called the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice in Washington, 900 miles away, an office that had nothing to do with him and answered to no one in his district. And he handed them everything. The video from Andre's phone, the recording from the FBI advance agent, the names of every witness in that diner, and he took himself completely out of it. He never touched the case. That was the discipline of the man. The very office he'd just been handed, the power he'd waited his whole life for. And in the one matter where he could have used it for himself, he refused to lay a finger on it. The Civil Rights Division took the case in a week. The charges, when they came down, were federal. Not a county slap on the wrist that a sheriff's buddy could make disappear. Deputy Roy Hutchins and Deputy Tyler Boone were each indicted under Title 18. Section 242 of the United States Code. Deprivation of rights under color of law. The same federal statute written into law during Reconstruction for exactly this. For men with badges who use them to take away what the Constitution guarantees. Hutchins faced additional counts for the use of force and for falsifying the radio call. The fabricated 1031 that the dispatcher's own logs proved never came from anyone but him. The video went public, the way these things go public now. Andre, the history teacher, the hot-headed little brother who'd kept his hands flat on the table and let it record, gave it to a journalist, with his brother's blessing, the day the indictments were unsealed. 11 minutes. 4 angles. Once the patrons' phones were combined. Crystal clear audio. The coffee tipped into a man's lap. The watch slapped to the floor. The hand on the weapon over a mother's baby. We know how to handle your kind around here. And then, at the end, the badge of the man who'd said it, lying on a diner counter where he'd set it down himself. 40 million views in a week. It did not need a single word of narration. It never does. And then the dam broke. The way it always breaks. Because men like Roy Hutchins are never doing it for the first time. Once the video was out, the calls started. To the journalist. To the Civil Rights Division. To a hotline the DOJ set up. A man who'd been pulled out of his car and searched on the same stretch of route, 9 inches, 2019. A grandmother who'd been called Gal and held for 2 hours over a license plate light. A teenager Hutchins had slammed onto a hood in the Pearlines lot. The same lot. 3 years before. Complaint after complaint. And when investigators went looking, they found that almost every one of them had been filed with the Macon Ridge Sheriff's Department and then quietly, carefully buried. Sheriff Buck Lanier had known, for years, he had known exactly who Roy Hutchins was, and he had filed it in a drawer because Roy got results and Roy never made trouble for the right people. That second scandal was bigger than the first. Because now it wasn't 2 bad men in a diner. It was a system that had protected them. A drawer full of human beings nobody had come to find. Because no convoy of federal vehicles had ever rolled up Route 9 for them. The Department of Justice opened a pattern or practice investigation into the entire Macon Ridge Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Lanier was forced to resign before the year was out, and was himself indicted for obstruction over the buried complaints. The county was placed under a federal consent decree, outside monitoring, mandatory body cams, retraining, a civilian review board with actual teeth, the most aggressive oversight that Little County had ever been subject to in its entire history. The trial of Roy Hutchins lasted 6 days. His lawyer put him on the stand, and Hutchins cried and said he'd feared for his safety, that the men had been aggressive, that he'd only been doing his job. And then the prosecutor, a Civil Rights Division attorney named Dolores Pratt, who had no connection to Macon Ridge and no axe to grind, only the law, asked him one question on cross. Deputy Hutchins, 40 seconds before you cross that diner to detain Mr. Calloway, a stranger you had never seen walked in, sat down, and unmarked bay, and sat down. Did you ask that man for his identification? Hutchins opened his mouth, closed it. Let the record reflect, Pratt said, that the stranger Deputy Hutchins did not question was a federal agent who recorded everything Deputy Hutchins did to the man he did question. She turned to the jury. He'll tell you, he treats everyone the same. The tape tells you who he crossed the room for. 6 days. 2 hours of deliberation. Guilty. Hutchins on all counts. Boone on the lesser counts. The jury showed the young deputy some mercy. And so, quietly, had the prosecution. Because Tyler Boone had done something Roy Hutchins never did. He'd taken the stand and told the truth. The whole truth. About what he'd been a part of and what he'd watched his training officer teach him. Roy Hutchins was sentenced to federal prison and a lifetime ban from ever wearing a badge again. He stood for the sentence the way cornered men do. Hands folded, staring at the floor, like it might open up and take him. It didn't. Tyler Boone got probation, lost his certification, and, by every account, spent a long time afterward becoming a different kind of man than the one Roy Hutchins had been making him into. But I told you this story doesn't end with punishment. Punishing two men was never the point. Two men in prison doesn't fix a county. It barely fixes a Tuesday. So let me tell you what Nathaniel Calloway actually did with the office he'd spent 30 years earning, and let me tell you about his mother. Because I haven't forgotten her, and neither did he. Miss Ada Calloway held on for 19 more days. Nathaniel drove down every weekend he could. The official car this time. The detail trailing him. And he'd sit in that narrow hospice room and hold her paper-light hand and tell her things. He told her about the swearing in. He held up his right hand for her, even though her eyes were closed, and told her the words he'd said in front of those judges. And one evening near the end, when the nurse Dorothy said, "Talk to her. She can hear you," he took his father's watch out of his coat, the crack still across the face. He'd refused to have it repaired. And he wound it. And he held it up next to her ear so she could hear it ticking. The same watch her husband had carried out of a town that tried to break him. And he said, "Mama, it's still going. After everything, it's still keeping time." And Dorothy swore to her dying day, that Ada Calloway smiled. She passed in her sleep that night. Both her sons were in the room. She had lived 81 years. Most of them as a woman, this country tried very hard to make small. And she died, having raised a United States attorney and a teacher who told 140 children the truth every single year. And if there is any justice in this world that the courts can't reach, it is that she got to be their mother and they got to be her sons. They buried her next to their father, under the same patch of pines. And Nathaniel set a single dented brass watch on the headstone for a moment before they lowered her, and then he put it back over his heart, where it stays. Now, the office. The first thing Nathaniel Calloway did as United States Attorney, the first official act, his first week, was stand up a civil rights and color of law unit inside his own district, dedicated prosecutors. A direct line for citizens to report exactly what had happened to him in that diner. A line that didn't run through any sheriff's drawer. A line that men like Roy Hutchins could not bury. He hired for it carefully. He put a billboard up on Route 9. The same, Route 9, with a phone number and 4 words. You have the right. In his first 18 months, that unit opened more civil rights cases than the district had brought in the previous 15 years combined. Not all of them ended in convictions. That's not how it works. But every single person who called that line got something this country had denied them their whole lives. Something Nathaniel understood the value of better than anyone. They got answered. Somebody picked up. Somebody wrote it down. Somebody came looking. He knew, all the way down, what it meant to be the person nobody comes looking for. He gave one speech that year that people still pass around. He gave it to a graduating class of new federal agents, and he told them the story of the diner. Not to shame anyone, but to teach. And he said this: And I'm going to give it to you the way he said it. I had a video. I had a recording. I had 6 federal vehicles that came to find me because of the job I held. I had every advantage a man in my position can have. And I still spent 11 minutes that morning being treated like I didn't have the right to drink coffee in my own hometown. So I need you to sit with the only question that matters. If it took all of that, the title, the marshals, the Senate vote, to make one deputy in one diner stop, then what, in God's name, happens to the man who has none of it? The man with no video, no detail, no office, the man whose name nobody runs and nobody worries about. That man is the entire reason this job exists. Don't you ever forget him. Because the law is not for the people. The law already protects. The law is for him. What happens to the man who has none of it? That question became the unofficial motto of his whole tenure. They printed it on the wall of the new unit. People wrote it in the margins of editorials. It outlived the news cycle, which almost nothing does, because it was true. And people are starving for things that are true. The morning the video hit 40 million views, every network in the country wanted Nathaniel Calloway on camera. They wanted the angle you'd expect, the powerful black prosecutor who got the last laugh, the revenge story, the victory lap. Producers called his office for a week, and he turned down every single one of them because he understood something about spectacle that the people chasing it never do. The moment this became a story about him, about one man's vindication, one satisfying ending, one bad cop in prison, it stopped being useful. A revenge story lets everybody go home feeling good. It closes the file, and the file, Nathaniel knew, was nowhere near closed. So when he finally did speak, he didn't do it on a talk show. He did it in a hearing room, in front of a congressional subcommittee studying police accountability. And he did it the way he did everything. Quiet. Exact. Impossible to look away from. He didn't tell them his story to make them angry. He told them the numbers. How many complaints had been buried in that one small county? How many people had called the hotline once they finally believed someone might pick up? How the only reason anyone knew his name was a phone in his brother's pocket and a convoy of federal vehicles that would never, not in 100 years, come for an ordinary man. A senator asked him, near the end, what he wanted, what single change, and Nathaniel didn't ask them to punish anyone. He asked them to make the cameras mandatory, the complaints public, the records unburiable. Don't build a system that needs a United States attorney to happen to be sitting in the booth. He said, build one that works when nobody important is watching. That's the only kind that's worth anything. The rest is just luck. And luck has never once been fairly distributed in this country. And you know it. The room was silent. It was the kind of silence his mother used to make in a room just by standing up straight in it. The reforms that grew out of that hearing didn't carry his name. He made sure of that. 2. He didn't want a law named Calloway. He wanted a law that worked. Some of it passed. Some of it died in committee, the way most decent things do, but the parts that lived are still working in places he will never visit, for people he will never meet, which is, if you think about it, exactly the kind of justice his father was asking for on a sidewalk in 1962, not for himself, for the next man, for the man who has none of it, and Andre, the little brother, the history teacher who kept his hands flat on the table and let it record Andre Calloway, took the video into his own classroom. With his brother's permission, and the faces of the patrons blurred, he built an entire unit around it. 11 minutes of footage, line by line. He taught his students the Fourth Amendment off of it. He taught them the exact question his brother had asked. Am I being detained? And what's the reasonable suspicion? He made them practice it, out loud, until it was carved into them the way you are, not what they say you are, had been carved into him by a woman ironing other people's shirts by lamplight. He told them, my brother knew his rights cold, and it still happened to him. And he still kept his hands where they could be seen. Because being right does not make you safe, but knowing the words, having them ready, saying them calm, that's a kind of armor. Wear it and carry a witness. Always carry a witness. He called the unit Know the Words. Other teachers asked for it. Then schools in the next county. Then a nonprofit picked it up. The last anyone counted. Know the Words was being taught in over 200 classrooms in 5 states. All of it grown from one cracked glass morning in a diner that should have just been biscuits. So where is everybody now? Roy Hutchins is in a federal facility. He'll be an old man when he gets out, and he'll never carry a badge again. And the town he ran like a kingdom for 26 years took his name off the little plaque in the sheriff's lobby and does not say it much anymore. Just like Nathaniel said about the men at the lunch counter in 1962, nobody remembers their names. They never do. Tyler Boone moved away, finished a degree, and, last anyone heard, works with at-risk kids and tells them, when it's the right moment, about the 8 months he spent learning to be cruel from a man he admired, and the 9 minutes it took to lose everything, and the choice he made on a witness stand to finally, for once, tell the truth. Some people said he got off too easy. Maybe. But a man who turns all the way around and spends the rest of his life walking the other direction, that's worth something too. The story doesn't have to be all fire. Sheriff Buck Lanier's department is under federal monitoring to this day. Body cams on every deputy. A civilian board that can actually fire people. The drawer where complaints used to go to die has been emptied. Every case in it reopened. It is not a perfect place now. There is no such thing, but it is a watched place. A place where the people finally have something they never had before. A number that gets answered. A camera that doesn't blink. And the knowledge, bone deep and brand new, that the badge is not above the law it carries. Casey, the 19-year-old waitress, testified. She was terrified, and she did it anyway. In open court, and she told the truth about what she saw. And afterward, Nathaniel Calloway wrote her a letter, by hand, that simply said, you were braver than you thought you could be. And it mattered. And I will not forget it. She kept that letter. She framed it. Glenda the cook retired from that griddle a year later. And at her little send-off, she told the story to anyone who'd listen of the morning the United States Attorney stood in her diner with coffee on his slacks and asked, before anything about himself, that the scared girl by the pie case be taken care of first, and Pearline's kitchen is still open. Out at the bend, where Route 9 meets the old county road, they never put up a plaque. That wouldn't be Macon Ridge. But ask anybody at the counter, and they'll point to the booth by the window and tell you, in a hush, what happened there. and what it cost. Two men who walked in thinking they ran the place. The coffee's still bottomless. They still don't ask anybody where they got their watch. And once in a while, on a weekend, a tall man in a good coat comes in alone, sits in that same booth facing the door, orders biscuits and black coffee, and winds a cracked brass watch at the table before he eats. The regulars know to leave him be. He's just a son who used to come here with his mother. He's just a man keeping his own time. And Nathaniel Calloway still carries a dented brass watch with a crack across its face. He has been offered, more than once, to have it fixed. He always says no, because the crack is part of it now. A man tried to break it, and it kept ticking. A man tried to break him, and 100 men before that one. Going back through his father and his grandmother and a whole line of people this country tried to make small, and they kept going. They kept keeping time. The crack isn't damage. The crack is the proof. All right. Listen. Yeah. The story. That part's made up. There's no Roy Hutchins. No pier lines. No 9 minutes. I made that up. But that feeling, the one where somebody looks at you and decides who you are before you open your mouth, where you have to stay calm, hands visible, while somebody who's wrong about you holds your whole morning, your whole self, in their hands. Yeah, that part's real. That happens in this country every single day. In diners and on highways and in lobbies and on planes. To people who do not have 6 federal vehicles coming to find them. And I'm not going to lie to you, that part hurts. It's supposed to hurt. So forget the made-up part for a second. Here's the real question. The one Nathaniel's whole life was about. What happens to the man who has none of it? The one with no title, no detail, no camera. When you see it happen to him, and you will, what do you do? Do you look at your plate? Like the farmer? Or are you a little braver than you were the day before? Like the girl by the pie case. And I want to ask you one more thing. And I want you to actually sit with it before you answer. If you'd been in that diner, not Nathaniel, not the deputies, just somebody in a booth with a cup of coffee, would you have lifted your phone? Would you have said, "Hey, now"? Or would you have told yourself it wasn't your business and gone back to your eggs? There's no wrong answer here, but there's an honest one. Drop it in the comments. I read them. I genuinely want to know what you'd have done. Because the whole thing only ever comes down to that. Not the marshals. Not the badges on the counter. Just 20 quiet people in a room. And which one of them finally decides to stop being quiet? If this story puts something in your chest, anger, or hope, or that ache that means you recognized it, then do me a favor. Hit that like button so more people find it. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Somebody who's been made to feel small. Somebody who's forgotten that the crack is the proof. And subscribe, because there's another one coming. And the next person they underestimate might just be the one holding all the cards. Justice doesn't always come in 9 minutes. Most of the time, it takes a lot longer. And a lot of the time, it doesn't come at all. But it should. It always should. And until it does, keep your hands where they can be seen. Carry a witness. And never let anybody tell you that you're what they say you are. You're not. You never were. Keep keeping time.